Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to give folks about 30 seconds to get into our Zoom room before getting started today. Oh, I see it's already happening. Last week, we had about 75 people in our Zoom room for Energy Plus Democracy. And today I expect about the same. So thanks, folks, for making time for us over your lunch periods today. Just a couple more seconds and then we'll get going. All right, let's do it. Thank you everyone for being here today. We are excited to introduce to you part 2 of Fresh Energy's Energy Plus webinar series. My name is Jo Olson and my pronouns are she, her. I am the Senior Director of Communications and Engagement at Fresh Energy, and I am kicking off our webinar today. So if you haven't heard of Fresh Energy before, we are a Minnesota-based nonprofit working toward a vision of a just, prosperous, and resilient future powered by a shared commitment to a carbon neutral economy. Now, to today's event. Energy and climate issues play out across our society, in books and film, in institutions of higher learning, our democracy, and the very air we breathe. Minnesota's colleges are modeling net zero innovation and teaching the next generation of leaders. So today, we're going to discuss what is on the horizon for these important institutions. But first, before I get too far along, I want to thank our sponsors for today's event who helped make the series possible. Thank you to Great River Energy for joining us as a gold sponsor and to Sunrun for joining us as a bronze sponsor. And also, I want to shout out and thank all of our promotional partners who helped spread the word about this event. This list is bigger and better than it's ever have been in the 3 years that we've been running this series. We're so grateful for all of your partnerships. We really appreciate it. And then one quick reminder before I forget, the last 15 minutes of this webinar will be an audience Q&A, but that means you can submit your questions actually at any time of the webinar. No need to wait for the end. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Just find that button, type your question in there, and we'll get to it toward the end of the webinar. And with that, I think I am going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Alan Gleckner, Executive Lead of Policy and Programs here at Fresh Energy, to do the introductions.
Thank you, Jo. All right. Let's get started and meet our panel of great experts that we'll be talking with today to dig a little deeper into how Minnesota's colleges are modeling net zero innovation and teaching the next generation of leaders and clean energy technicians. Welcome to our panelists. Today, I'm joined by, first, Martha Larson. Martha is the Director of Sustainability at RMF Engineering. In 2010, Martha became the first manager of campus and energy sustainability at Carleton College, where she helped the college reduce its carbon footprint by nearly 70%, which is where we at Fresh Energy met Martha. All right, next we have Rose Patzer. Rose has served as faculty at Minnesota West since 2007 in the Biofuels Technology and Energy Technical Specialist programs, and she's currently the Executive Director for the Minnesota State Energy Center of Excellence. She enjoys promoting awareness about the renewable and traditional energy industries and has actively participated in a variety of energy-related federal and state grants throughout her career. And next, Amelia Vohs. Amelia is a regulatory attorney at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, where she litigates clean energy cases, specializing in matters before the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission and other state utility boards. She's also an instructor of the Environment and Energy Law Clinic at the University of Minnesota Law School. All right, so let's jump right in and get started. First question for folks. As an attorney myself, I've spent plenty of time in the education system and had the opportunity to experience firsthand some of the work going into teaching the next generation. So let's start there with Amelia. Amelia, can you tell us a little bit about your dual role as both an instructor at the U's Environment and Energy Law Clinic and as an attorney at MCEA? How have you seen the role of energy and climate in higher education evolve during your time in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alan. So just to kind of give folks an idea of what a clinic is, because that doesn't sound like a very legal term, it sounds like a medical term. most law schools, including the University of Minnesota, have things called clinics, where students are able to get practical hands-on experience practicing in a particular field of law. The University of Minnesota happens to have an energy and environmental law clinic, which is hosted at Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, which is where I work. So what that means is we have about 4 student attorneys who come work with us for a year, every year, through their work in the clinic. And those students get to practice on a student license. So they get to do a little bit more than a student would who's maybe just doing an internship. They can make court appearances, they can do more in-depth casework, all under the supervision of attorneys who are at Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. So I'm both an attorney at Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, but also I supervise these law students in the clinic and help them get connected with environment and energy law cases, depending on their areas of interest. And I've been supervising law students since about 2011, both at MCEA, where I'm at now, but also previously at Hoosier Environmental Council in Indiana. And, I've really seen a difference in students in that period of about 10 years. And the students that I see now who are coming to, work at an environmental nonprofit that does legal work, they are now coming in with really specific interests. And I find that they're much more educated, particularly about climate change. Whereas, the students that I was working with in 2011 were coming in and thinking, oh, I have an interest in the environment. I have an interest in potentially practicing environmental law. I kind of want to see what this is about. The students that I see in the clinic now are about 4 steps ahead. They're very educated about the issues. They are doing this program because they know they want to practice energy law. They want to work on climate change. They want to be part of climate solutions. So the students that I'm working with now are just coming really educated and really motivated, particularly to tackle climate change. They all want to work on climate change, which for me as somebody who works in energy law is really exciting. Yeah,
thanks, Amelia. And it's heartening to hear, and I guess not surprising given the scale of what we're dealing with, but it's not good to hear nonetheless. But now let's shift a little bit away from lawyers to the folks that are bringing skilled labor actually into the field in clean energy. So Rose, you've been in the energy world since 2007 at Minnesota West in Granite Falls and in the greater Minnesota State College and University system. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role, as well as some of the changes in the energy sector you've seen in training up the state's energy workforce?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me with you this afternoon. A little bit about our Energy Center of Excellence. We are one of 8 centers of excellence that are within the State College and University system, and each one of us has a focal point. Mine happens to be energy, and it's all things energy. We have seen the history of our fuels in Minnesota, starting with petrol, but obviously, like mid-90s, we saw ethanol, and then early 2000s was biodiesel and wind, and now very strong in solar, and also on the horizon and pretty much bringing into the present is our geothermal and our heat pumps. So we really are seeing a varying age of students coming into play, and all different ages, all different backgrounds. And we really are a migratory society. So people that want to move around the country, the solar industry is one of the best, and the wind industry, best migratory professions to get into.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Rose. And yeah, it's great to hear. We're going to need more and more of these skilled laborers as the energy transition carries on. So thanks a lot. And now to Martha. So your work at Carleton ensured the college didn't only teach, but also showed what clean energy innovation looks like. Can you tell us a little bit about your work at Carleton modeling net zero innovation and how that applies to your new role at RMF?
Yes, of course, Alan. I just joined RMF in June after 12 years of helping Carleton work toward its carbon neutrality goals. And the way that began was Carleton signed a commitment with about 700 other schools to be a carbon neutral campus by a specific date, and Carleton State was the year 2050. So when I got there in 2010, we started by writing a climate action plan, which included many of the strategies that Rose just mentioned, and set about really digging deeper into the feasibility of each of those strategies. And Carleton at the time had one commercial sized wind turbine, so we knew wind power really well. And very soon after I arrived, we put up a second. So we started with just clean electricity and moved, some degree without realizing it, into the strategic electrification movement, because our next endeavor brought us into geothermal or geoexchange as a heating source. That was an 8-year transition. So we were inspired by Ball State University, which was the first campus scale geothermal project. That means it's not serving a single building. The geothermal well fields are serving a campus district energy system. So there's a picture Joe's sharing of drilling borings on the bald spot, which is our beloved quad, and the chapel in the background there. So it was a very intensive project. It touched every building. It allowed us to build a new satellite plant under a science building that was already planned for construction. So we tried to weave this into planned construction. And overall, what it did is it brought what was a steam heating distribution system, and it converted it to what we call low temperature, 120-degree hot water. And when you are only heating your medium to 120 degrees instead of 330 degrees steam, you can make that heat with a lot more low carbon technologies. So Carleton chose geothermal heat pumps tied to geothermal bore fields, but even things like solar thermal are great producers when you're heating to 120 degrees. So it really opened up a lot of doors for Carleton to engage with future heat recovery and heat generation technologies that move us toward low carbon heating powered by zero carbon electricity. So we started to kind of piece that together and realize that's our path to carbon neutrality. And all along the way, we were looking for ways to make the campus a living lab. So our geology students were out in the field with the drillers, learning side by side, what the concerns are, what the issues are, and taking samples. They gave a whole sample set to the Department of Health. They kept a sample set for a teaching and learning tool in the classroom. And now they're engaged in some very complicated research about how groundwater flow may impact efficiency of the bore field. So we've had many co-benefits on the curricular side, as well as reducing the carbon footprint of the campus by almost 70%. That's combined, the wind turbines and the geothermal project.
Amazing. And and our understanding is that's you're now at RMF kind of spreading the same philosophy and same kind of project scope to other places. Great.
Yeah, I couldn't get enough, so I'm going to try to do it again. I'm actually at Williams College today.
Oh, wonderful.
They're working on a campus decarbonization plan, and in a couple weeks I'll be at Bowdoin College doing a similar workshop. So I feel very blessed to have the opportunity to take all those lessons learned and continue sharing them with other schools.
Super cool. And we're in love with that project at Carleton here at Fresh Energy. So it's super cool to get to share it a little more widely on this webinar. But yeah, switching gears. So it wasn't that long ago that energy and climate weren't really a big topic in higher education. But what I'm hearing from you all is that that definitely isn't the case anymore. Can you each speak to where you see this change coming from? Is it leadership, students, alumni, elsewhere? So the question is for all three of you, but let's start with Amelia in your role with U of M law students over the years.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think the change is really student driven, and that there's so much student interest. And we've seen students come to us in the clinic, for example, who went to law school because they wanted to be doing big things on climate. And instead of, going to law school and discovering energy law and thinking, oh, that could be cool, maybe I want to work there. So I had the pleasure of getting to work with this student last year in the clinic, and he was a young man who, when he was a high school student, maybe high school student, but for sure college student at Carleton, he got really involved in opposing the Line 3 oil pipeline. And he and some other people his age formed together and formed a group called the Youth Climate Interveners. And they which to me, this is just incredible, the brilliance of youth. They participated in the Public Utilities Commission hearing on line 3, which was very long, very technical, very intense. And they did that all on their own, without an attorney. And it's my full-time job to participate in cases like that as an attorney. So I think that's really incredible. But as part of their participation in that process, this young man decided that he wanted to go to law school because he felt there was a real need to have attorneys who were committed to doing climate work. And he ended up in the clinic, and in the clinic he said, well, could we possibly work on line 3 again, and could I maybe participate in the case that was now at the Minnesota Court of Appeals? Could I represent the youth climate interveners now as a law student? And we said, sure. So, as a student in the clinic, he was getting this really cool experience of being an attorney, student attorney at the Minnesota Court of Appeals, representing this group that he was once a part of as a youth. And, getting to do environmental law and climate change, address climate change issues as a student in the clinic, which, and of course he did an incredible job, just a remarkable job as somebody who hadn't even graduated from law school litigating that case. But he's a perfect example of the change that I'm seeing, that we see these students who have already done advocacy or already have real life experience working on climate. And I'm seeing them come to law school or, higher education as a way to take their advocacy to the next level.
It's really cool. Thanks for that story, Amelia. So yeah, moving on to Martha. I imagine you were pulling a lot of levers with Carleton leadership throughout your project and making that happen. So can you add your insight as to where you think this interest and change is coming from?
Absolutely. I'll add a fun connection to Amelia's story. We compared notes offline and found out that was a student, the student she was just talking about, that worked in my office as an undergraduate, who, like she said, came in with tons of advocacy experience, even having done it as a high school student, continued to gather experience in our office doing campus change and campus initiatives, and then went on and got inspired to get a law degree. So it's very, very fun to see the level of passion and also now the experience of very young people, experience and knowledge that they're bringing to these professions.
Yeah.
So at the administrative level at Carleton, I think the fact that we signed the Second Nature President's Climate Commitment was a real catalyst. And I know, commitments have varying levels of integrity and follow through, but that one was very substantial in the fact that it really mobilized higher ed as a whole sector and inspired higher ed to act in concert in a collaborative and, friendly competition, but also a collaborative way. And what that did is it allowed us to really catalyze change with all that shared knowledge, and then setting examples. So we learned from Ball State. Bowdoin and Williams are now learning from us. We learned about other technologies like biomass from, Middlebury. So it really opened the floodgates to gaining knowledge and experience. So you didn't have to be the one guinea pig for all the technologies. You could kind of, everybody takes a piece of it and we all compare notes. So I think that competition certainly and the commitment certainly allowed our administration to see that there was a structure and a goal. And with the climate action plans that accompanied that commitment, there became a roadmap. And all of that really planful approach allowed it to have a feeling of being very practical and very thoughtful, rather than just kind of shooting darts at the wall. We did our fair share of that as well, but a lot of it was pretty structured. And then I also feel that the collaborations that have grown out of the professionals that have now developed, I mean, there's a lot of job development in the trades, as Rose mentioned, but there's also a lot of development of the sustainability profession. And we're now seeing them not only in higher ed, but also healthcare and government. So these networks of professionals that can share knowledge help to frame these issues for the board. And then lastly, we really tied our project to the practical needs of Carleton. Save money on operating costs, prepare for carbon taxation, prepare for a net zero future, and support the deferred maintenance needs of our campus. So that all went a long way in showing that there are co-benefits. It's not just a project to be green, it's a project to maintain our campus in a very thoughtful way.
That's awesome. Yeah, love it. Rose, in your role, mostly working with students in 2-year specific training programs, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I really think that students have a stronger voice than they have even 5 years ago. It's just amazing to me. Social media, how strong of a role that plays in our lives, in everybody's lives these days. And the social media has really helped to define and align our programs within the state. We do have 30 energy related programs within the state college and university system. So there's a lot of opportunities, and some of those are 1-year programs, some of them are 2-year. But the strength in numbers is showing our solar programs are certainly growing. And so the students are pushing the development of more of these programs and accessible education around the state. With students having the stronger voice, that it truly is industry that drives our programs and the education in the 2-year state. We have advisory committees for all of our technical programs, and those are industry and education partnerships. So it's very great working relationship across the state, especially with our energy field. And we also work with, we're seeing an interest in heat pumps programming. So that may be a new program that's offered in the next year, or even electric vehicle charging installation technology programs might be coming on the horizon. It just depends where the push is. And we certainly looking forward to some new federal funds that might come and help fund some of these pilot programs as well.
That's awesome. And not that anyone cares, but I would heartily endorse heat pump and EV technician training, especially the heat pumps. We need a lot of that. Great. So before we move into the public Q&A, keep putting questions into the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen if you can. But I can't pass up asking this question when I'm sharing a virtual table with 3 established educators and leaders in clean energy. So as we all know, the job market is really tight right now, and we're seeing lots of job changes, mid-career shifts, and also a lot of available jobs in clean energy here in Minnesota. And then hopefully that's going to be growing a lot in the future here. So what advice do you have for people who are interested in starting a career or making a mid-career change in energy law, policy, energy installation, or planning? So this is the part where we ask you all for your expert advice. Amelia, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would say if you're interested in it, if you feel called to do it, you should absolutely pursue it. I think I'm a good example. I wanted to get into this work when I went to law school, and I graduated in the recession. I graduated in 2011. So there were no jobs, but especially jobs in environment and energy law, which are, really growing in popularity. So it may not always be a linear path. It may not be a situation of, I decide I want to do this and I'm going to do it tomorrow. But everybody, myself included, that I've met who, really wants to get into this gets there. And, I'm seeing lots of colleagues now who started in completely different fields. I have an amazing colleague who, has a doctorate in the healthcare field and has now, decided that climate is such an important issue and really, a threat to the health of the human population, that she moved into climate work. And, it doesn't necessarily require new schooling or a specific background. I'm working in a very technical field of energy law, and I was an English major, so my undergraduate serves me not at all in understanding how electricity and the grid works. But, I think if you're passionate and you can demonstrate that, that interest, I think that there's absolute opportunity for you in this field, and you should pursue it.
That's awesome advice. Thanks, Amelia. Let's go to Rose.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm right along the lines with Amelia. I was a non-traditional student when I started college. I was in my late 20s, and I had 3 children under the age of 4. I worked full-time, and I pursued a 4-year degree full-time. And I have to tell you, it's a juggling act, but I have my husband to thank for that, for picking up the pieces when I dropped them. And I was able to work my junior and senior year as a chemist undergraduate. I was able to work at a lab that was located at the university and learned a lot about ethanol and biodiesel and agricultural co-products. And it was a fantastic launch to my career. So I worked for 10 years as a researcher at the state and then turned over to teaching, because I certainly learned, especially at the process plants, the biodiesel plant startups, the chemists in the lab, if they didn't understand the process, the troubleshooting became more challenging. And so it was really a great opportunity to become a teacher and to teach some of these employees in these renewable energy fields. And now to work as a director and oversee all of the energy programs, it's pretty exciting. So I would encourage anybody who would like to find a field in energy. There's lots of opportunities. Matter of fact, a lot of people will hear me say we're the land of 10,000 lakes, but we're also the land of 10,000 opportunities to work in an energy career. So
I love that. Is there a t-shirt?
We could make one.
I'm now feel sheepish for complaining about having 2 kids and 1 full-time job. So that you're putting me to shame here. Let's go to Martha. Do you have some advice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to echo what Amelia and Rose have said, there's room for everyone because it's an all hands on deck moment with regard to the climate crisis. And if you want to dedicate your career to climate, do it, because there's a place for you. My background was in mechanical engineering back when there wasn't an energy program or a sustainability program or an environmental science program. You know, it meant brownfield cleanup, and that's about it. So it didn't exist. And I went into the design and construction industry, and that's where I've been ever since. But in learning about how much impact buildings have on the environment and the systems like LEED and other certifications that are solutions to that, or at least strategies to address that, I got into the climate work through my chosen profession, despite the fact that it hadn't started out as an environmentally focused job. And now that's all I do. So I would also emphasize that every discipline has a place. There's arts opportunities that bring awareness and spur emotions that prompt action and prompt engagement. We need our philosophers and our historians that help frame these issues because they are existential, and we do need to learn from the past. And of course, the STEM fields are spurring innovation and also integrated deeply with the trades who are actually implementing the work in the field. So I think no matter where you're at, what your age is, what level of education you want to get, and what discipline you feel as a natural fit for you, there is that is a lens that you can apply to working on climate. So it's very important. And I guess my last advice would be that things are changing so fast that no matter what discipline we're in or what job or what role we play, we have to be observant. We have to keep learning. We have to have an open mind. We're all lifelong students, and that's kind of, there's always room for new people because there's always new information coming down the pipeline. So no one's an expert.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a perfect note to pivot on here to our Q&A, which will be next. So again, still time to put your questions in the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen. But before we head to Q&A, Joe's going to jump in here with a few reminders and housekeeping items.
Perfect. Thank you, Alan. And that was really inspiring. I don't know what the 3 of you could do with a mid-career communications professional, but feeling pretty inspired. Okay, well, we'll be back next week. Energy Plus will return on Thursday at noon with my colleague Margaret Cherney-Hendrick, along with Jesse Carr-Schmuel of the Minnesota Department of Health, Emma Hines of RMI, and T. McClenty of MN350. And we will be discussing the intersection of energy and health. And while we're on the subject of events, registration is now open for Fresh Energy's virtual benefit breakfast on October 13th. We'll be featuring Julian Brave Noisecat, a nationally acclaimed journalist and thought leader who has become a force for climate action across movements. You can register to join us at fresh-energy.org/benefit breakfast. And finally, It's going to be extremely hot this week, or so I've heard, but we Minnesotans know better. We know that temperatures are going to be below zero in just a few short months. So, for the first time ever, Fresh Energy's created our very own branded wool socks that celebrate wind, solar, and clean energy. Everyone who donates $50 to Fresh Energy by the end of July can snag their very own pair of these limited edition socks. And thanks to a very generous donor, all gifts will be matched. So your contribution technically is doubled. And with that, use that Q&A function and I will turn things back over to Alan.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Great. So seeing some questions roll in here. I'm trying to do this in real time, so forgive me. But I think we also have a couple pre-submitted questions for folks that registered that are really great. So let's start there. The first question is from Brian S. And I think this is a good one for Rose. Please explain the differences, if any, in workforce development efforts in the renewable energy career tracks versus the traditional energy career tracks and how your programs approach that.
Well, a number of years ago, we contracted for a study on core competencies. And what's really interesting, folks, is that a lot of the core competencies in a process plant, whether it's process dynamics, it's P&ID or PLCs, when you're working with those courses, they also lead themselves or lend themselves into the renewable energy fields as well. So we can pretty much, piggyback the programs for those core competencies. And then you get specific when you're working with a solar install, for instance, or a wind turbine, especially if you don't want to be afraid of heights if you're going to work in the wind industry, but the core competencies really make a difference for this, for both sides of the energy world.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. Then let's see here. We have some good questions. A specific one for Martha here about which energy engineering degree, if you had to pick one for making a climate impact, what would you tell a student to do?
And they're all going to work. I mean, it's probably seems like a cop out, but I'm a mechanical engineer, so I've really focused on plants and distribution and heating and cooling systems. But electrification is not going to happen without upgrades to the electrical grid and increased generation and clever designs for turbines and solar panels. So and of course, industrial engineering with all those processes and, trying to find efficiencies, you can't go wrong.
Yeah. And I would say in our world, we're seeing a never-ending need for electrical engineers on the kind of planning and transmission side and all that, utility and grid work. Great. So another pre-submitted question is from Simeon M. That I guess would also be a good one for Martha. Sorry to hit you back to back here. With regards to work that's most important to you, or just for work and making a difference, what do you suggest for leveraging to collaborate with higher ed? Sorry, I'm butchering this. Basically, what can you do at colleges and universities that you generally don't expect or see from other public-private organizations? So what I'm reading is like, what's special about higher ed, or what's uniquely possible with higher ed compared to other institutions?
Yeah, I'm sure there's an angle for Rose and Amelia on this as well. But from Carleton's perspective, a private institution has the ability to make a lot of their own decisions about how they spend their money, what they're willing to invest. They also manage and operate their own systems, which, there are pros and cons to operating your own system versus having a third-party operator. But I think that gave our maintenance personnel a lot of engagement throughout the concept phases of our utility transition, so that when it came time to operate it, they knew what they were getting into. They'd been part of the process. So that engagement within the facilities department was really important. And the fact that higher ed as a sector is very collaborative. There's not a lot of things that people feel are proprietary or secretive or won't tell you. It's extremely collaborative. So, when we were halfway through our project, we had a big summit, and schools from throughout the upper Midwest and the East Coast came to Carleton to see the plant, to see the piping, to walk the tunnels and really get a feel for what we were doing. And, nothing was secret, and we didn't hold anything back, even the tough stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think I was thinking about this a little too narrowly. I think Rose would totally have a good perspective on this. about what, from your perspective, is kind of uniquely special about working in higher ed or through higher ed for climate progress?
Well, with our centers of excellence, we really are an education industry connector. And so we have at least 150 members that are part of our Minnesota Energy Consortium, and it's traditional and renewable fuel alike. But we really do work hard to connect even with energy sector groups with energy to partner up. We also work to make sure that all of our curriculum is in alignment with the energy industries themselves. So it really, always happy to partner. We have a chancellor that's very interested in partnerships, whether it's with private sectors, individuals, or just other colleges and universities. So
that's wonderful. I'm seeing some pretty hardcore legal questions in the Q&A, Amelia. If you want to talk about natural standing for natural resources, but maybe we'll save that for a different day. But it's a good question. That's where we call on our philosophers too, I think. But here's a good one you could take, Amelia. This is from Sam B. What are the most, or I guess not most, but top 3 skills that professionals looking to transition to clean energy policy sector should look to improve on?
That's a great question. From my perspective, I think one of the most important skills is, a bravery or a courage and a love for learning. You're going to need to dive into areas that you probably don't know anything about and just be willing to take the time to kind of get educated and get up to speed and, phone a friend and ask. I'm always a fan of asking basic questions. So I think that's really critical. I think another important skill is communication and being able to really communicate with people who are in different places. I see one of the big challenges in climate work that we're facing now is figuring out how to bring more people along in the movement and how to talk to people who maybe aren't totally in belief that climate change is human caused, but may still be experiencing some of the effects. How do we bring you with us? Or, how do we talk to rural communities that aren't super excited about seeing solar panels or, wind farms in their community? How do we bring them with this movement? So I think some really good communication skills are key. And I don't know if I have a third. I think I just have those 2. Maybe one of my colleagues has a third.
Any takers? Okay. I could probably trying to think of something, but it's too much pressure. But so not a question, but Claude put in the chat or in the Q&A that it might be useful for folks interested in this with some of these career questions and learning that MIT has open courseware. It's a free online courses you can do. And they have a climate change science course or multiple courses. So Google MIT open courseware and you can look for that. Thanks, Claude, for that. So one question that came up is around seeing more BIPOC folks and people of all genders in this field, whether it's doing the work through the trades and other folks, or whether it's on the industry side, policy, advocacy, all the above. I think we'd like to think, and I think it's true that it's getting better, but we certainly have a long way to go. So I think I'd love to hear all you guys' take on that. And maybe we could start with Rose.
Sure, I have to agree with you. The energy fields are our white male dominated field, and it has been for years, and we've been talking about changing that dynamic for years. And we're finally getting there, at least a little bit in Minneapolis. We do have a special, or one of the things, for instance, I realize we're looking at the climate and the clean energy today, but we are trying to have representatives of the community work for like Excel Energy and have them look like the neighbors that they're serving. And so we do have a fresh program coming up starting in August. It's a power line program right in the Riverside Park site for Xcel Energy. And we also have a nice training center that James Staples is working on getting rolling with solar installation. That's in Northeast Minneapolis. So accessible education will be helpful, I think, to change the dynamic of this as well, because most of our energy programs are outstate and thus not accessible to a lot of the dynamic population that we have in the state.
That's awesome. Yeah, love to hear about those new things coming up that seem right on target to help and address this. Martha, would you want to?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, it's representative of the issues we're having society-wide, where first we need to address these deficiencies and recognize, you know, how deficient are we? Why is that? What are steps we can take? And certainly I would agree with Rose, you know, the engineering industry, the energy industry have been white male dominated. So, you know, advocating for others is also a key part of this, and trying to just keep eyes wide open about where are people getting pushed down or pushed out, and where are there tables that don't have all the voices and a diverse enough group of voices representing, you know, a climate action plan or a utility and energy plan or a rate case. And how do we break down barriers? You know, if people are working multiple jobs, or they work nights, or they, you know, they can't attend these things, how can we use technology or just rethink the way that we present information and gather input so that it actually works for people's lives and their lifestyles, and it doesn't just work for people who can take a day off work and still get paid. It works for everybody.
Totally.
I'll actually chime into Alan. You know, from a legal advocate's perspective, I see two angles. One is, you know, the ongoing problem of we need to make law school, if people want to come at this from a legal angle, accessible, you know, and be recruiting also people, diverse people to go to law school, as it's, you know, very white male dominated still. There's more women, but it's still not that diverse. But I think, you know, looking at the advocacy work that I do as a legal advocate, I and others like me also have a role to help use the skills that we have to bring more people into the work we do, because we have that legal training, and we can help, you know, explain how do you access the Public Utilities Commission? How do you participate in a case there that you're interested in? I mean, as much as I think, you know, we'd like to say, oh, there's transparency in these processes and you can just go on their website and see how to submit a comment. Like, the reality is it's a really wonky, weird process if you don't hang out at the Public Utilities Commission all day. And so there's a lot of work for, I think, us as advocates who are, you know, or me as an advocate who's in that space a lot, to be reaching out and sharing what I know about how you engage in that space with others who want to engage, but, you know, maybe didn't go to law school, you know, don't have the legal resources, but can still participate as a member of the public. How do we kind of give them some tools to enter into that space so it's not so scary and foreign?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of one specific challenge that's facing the energy industry writ large, but we could also be curious to hear your thoughts on other challenges a little bit more specific to your, you know, your piece of the world here. So is there any one specific challenge that any of you would want to call out that you're working on, or that you think the energy industry in your space needs to address or should address?
I can jump in here. One of our biggest issues for the energy training is that we don't have an energy pathways on the career wheel for the Minnesota Department of Education. And so if we could get our little piece of the pie on that wheel, we'd be able to define some pathways in the K-12 system. Because right now the teachers have to teach to the standards. Well, if there aren't any standards defined, they're not going to teach the renewable or otherwise energy programs in their high school classroom. So that's one of the biggest challenges is, and then again, the other thing is just having accessible education to everybody. And so we're trying to work on that as well.
Awesome.
Certainly in my world, it really relates to what Rose does, is bulking up the skilled trades who can operate, maintain increasingly more sophisticated systems. You mentioned heat pumps, Alan. There's a heat pump boom that's going to be like the solar PV boom that we've just all witnessed. And you need technicians that know how to install those, know how to relate them. If you're doing geothermal borings, like have technical competence in geology as well as mechanical, trades. And then even things like drilling, if people are going to do large scale bore fields like Carleton, we were lucky to get a team of drillers when we needed them to do 300 bores that are 500 feet deep. That's a very specialized skill. And so I think all of those skills are going to be in very high demand, and people are going to be clamoring for them.
And
Absolutely.
I'll echo what Martha and Rose said, as somebody who's a policy advocate, the policy is only so good if we don't have the people on the ground to make those policies happen and to build the infrastructure that we're pushing for. So I think that's critical. It also, from a policy standpoint, sure wouldn't hurt if we had some stronger state or federal, mandates and regulation on climate. That would be a big help. And I'll just say, my perspective in the policy space is that there's a lot of interest in the state all over the place, from the municipal level to state agencies. Everybody wants to do some good work on climate, but a lot of people, especially, at the state level, feel very hamstrung by there being a lack of clear guidance from the state legislature about where we're going and how fast we're going there. And so a unifying charge would be incredibly helpful, and I think would be something that if it happened, it would give a real boost to a lot of the efforts that are already ongoing. Not that that's news to anyone, but
doesn't hurt to reiterate, though. Excellent. Well, looks like the Q&A box has slowed down a little bit, and that seems like a really great point to end on. So I think with that, let's bring our today's discussion to a close, and lots to think about as we close out here. And I'm sure any of us would be happy to be contacted with any questions folks didn't think of for the Q&A. Feel free to reach out. So yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Joe for our sign off. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alan, and thank you to our panelists. On behalf of everyone here at Fresh Energy, I just want to say thanks for attending part 2 of our Energy Plus webinar series. And thank you especially Martha, Rose, and Amelia for your time. Reminder for folks on the line that a recording of this webinar will be posted at fresh-energy.org/publications and on our podcast, Decarbonize the Clean Energy Podcast, which is available on all podcasting apps. You can learn more about Fresh Energy's work at fresh-energy.org and subscribe to our newsletters and all sorts of other good stuff there. And with that, we're going to give folks a few minutes back in their day. Thanks for being here.